so much. My name is Richard Gage, AIA. I've been a practicing architect for 20 years.
This fused element of steel, molten steel.
I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it. Nobody who's produced it.
NASA pictures, thermal images showed those sorts of temperatures in the basement.
What is the problem here? Somebody's lying. I'm going to leave it up to you to make your own conclusions.
So much for joining us right here on KBDI Colorado Public Television. I'm Sherry Burnson, and this is 9/11 Blueprint for Truth. I'm joined by Richard Gage. He is a San Francisco area-based architect. Richard Gage, AIA. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11Truth. Richard, welcome.
Thank you, Sherry. It's
what
great
an introduction.
To be here. Yes, this is very exciting for us at Architects and Engineers for 9/11Truth.
Well, this is the world broadcast premiere of this documentary. It hasn't aired anywhere on television.
There's a lot of people watching, and they're getting a lot of truth which they can't see on any other station so far. Thank you for your courage at KBDI.
Well, we are continuing with our quest for more information and truth and accountability. It started with 9/11 Press for Truth, which we aired a few months ago. We had such a demand from the Colorado community to air this documentary, 9/11 Blueprint for Truth. So, Richard, why don't you share with us a little bit more about your professional background?
You bet. I've been an architect for 20 years, and I have studied several different types of architectural construction projects, including institutional projects and so forth. Lately, I've worked most recently on a $400 million project with over 1,200 tons of steel framing in Nevada.
So you've had a long history of working in the architect field, and Richard is one of the leaders, really, in this movement for an independent investigation of what really happened during 9/11.
There's a lot of research that's been done. We've compiled the research from Stephen Jones, David Ray Griffin, Kevin Ryan, many, many others into a succinct set of easily understandable characteristic features of explosive controlled demolition, which we find in all three World Trade Center high-rises on 9/11.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about. We're here in the studio. We're going to be asking you to call in with your pledges of support. And right now, let's hear from Tom Colbert. I'm here with Richard Gage, AIA. You know, there's so much information in this documentary, Richard. A lot of scientific and factual data. We've got a lot of information to present to you right now. How did you become involved in this whole study? What happened here?
Well, it's curious. I'm a Reagan Republican, so I'm listening to free speech radio from Berkeley, of all things, and I hear David Ray Griffin talking about the characteristic features of controlled demolition as they relate to the Twin Towers. And I'm going, wait, I didn't hear about explosions at the towers. I didn't hear about near free fall collapses. I didn't hear about molten metal at the base of these towers, etc. Information which we're going to be coming up on right away. So I did the research, and I found out that what he was saying is true. And so then what I did is I found no architects or engineers talking about this and go, what's wrong? So I started Architects and Engineers for 9/11Truth. I gave the presentation to the firm I was working for at the time, and we signed up 14 out of the 15 that day of our architects. And now we have 750 architects and engineers calling for a new investigation into these collapses. It doesn't make sense to them, and everyone that we show it to virtually ends up agreeing with us that these are controlled demolitions and signing the petition.
Richard, let's talk for a minute about the research edition of the DVD, because what you're seeing right now in this broadcast is 1 hour. There is actually the 2-hour DVD that gets into a lot more information, a lot more background about your research and everything that's coming together over this.
Indeed, and what we just saw is the free fall collapse of Building 7. The 47-story skyscraper that collapses into its own footprint in just 6.5 seconds. This is uncanny. This is like the Republic Plaza building collapsing right here in Denver in just about 6.5, 7 seconds. 100 feet of free fall of this building's drop. This does not make sense to architects and engineers. The structure had to have been removed and could only have been removed forcibly. This is what disturbs them so much. And you don't have to be an architect or engineer to understand this. Everybody gets it.
Well, Richard's going to be with us for the entire broadcast premiere here of 9/11 Blueprint for Truth. And right now we're going to go back to Tom, but we'll be back with Richard.
Thanks, Sherry. Richard, thanks again for being here with us. Welcome to Colorado.
Thank you,
I
Tom.
know that San Francisco, where you live, is one of my favorite places. I go there every chance I get, but we're glad you're here.
It's great to be here.
I think this is a wonderful thing that you're doing, that you have really kind of devoted the rest of your professional career to figuring out what the real 9/11 story is. In this first segment of your documentary that we've just seen, you've presented a lot of technical information that seems pretty straightforward, pretty cut and dry. What's different in what we've just seen from what the government has told us?
Oh, good question, Tom. We're told that this building collapsed by fire. In fact, 8 to 10 fires, which the official story tells us are fairly small fires, but fairly large fires. But the video and photographic evidence suggests that they're quite small. In fact, they went out an hour and a half prior to the collapse of this building. Normal office fires cause the free fall collapse of Building 7, resulting in molten metal flowing like lava, as we heard, at the base of this building, and the Twin Towers, as a matter of fact. Explosions heard by witnesses that we don't even hear about from the official story. So there's so much disconnect between the official story and what really happened. Plus, I didn't even know about Building 7, the third worst structural failure in modern history. Most architects and engineers don't know. We go to architecture and engineering conventions, and we show them the third worst structural failure. They said, well, why didn't I know about this? Exactly. What happened to the media on 9/11 that we do not know this information? It's really quite disturbing.
I think that the Building 7 story really is remarkable to be able to destroy a building that thoroughly as just an incidental collateral damage to what appeared to be an accident.
In fact, the building has been completely dismembered almost and reduced to a footprint, almost in its own footprint, about 4 stories high, indicating that this molten steel resisting frame has been virtually cut. And so what you don't see in this companion edition on TV, but you will see in the research edition when you make your pledge, the 2-hour version is a free fall analysis by physicist David Chandler. You'll see NIST's official story versus the photos, the documentation of how big these fires actually were, actually how small they were, and NIST's animation, which doesn't look anything like the video documentation.
I can hardly wait to get into it. This is a remarkable program that you've brought here to show us, and again, we thank you very much. Let's go over and talk to Sherry.
Okay, we've got about 1 more minute. Richard, tell us what's coming up in this next segment of 9/11 Blueprint for Truth.
Well, we're going to look at why NIST had to avoid the truth about the molten metal found at the base of the Twin Towers. What's in the molten metal? What is thermite? And where does it come from? And why is it spread throughout the dust in iron-rich microspheres found throughout all of the dust throughout lower Manhattan? And why is there unignited nanothermite chips in all of these dust samples that have been collected and analyzed by a small team of scientists in a peer-reviewed paper? We'll look at the Twin Towers as well.
Well, we're going to return right now to 9/11 Blueprint for Truth right here on KBDI Colorado Public Television, but we'll be back with Richard just a little bit later. Thank you.
How about chemical evidence, though? What produced all this?
Welcome. My name is Tom Colbert, a volunteer here at Channel 12. Don't touch that dial. We've got lots more of this fascinating program, 9/11 Blueprint for Truth. I'm standing here with Richard Gage. He made this program, and we thank you for being here, coming out from San Francisco for this world premiere broadcast only on KBDI Channel 12. Richard, welcome.
Yes, and thank you, Tom. And I have to thank Ken Jenkins and Hamuk and the cast, the crew at Lightwork. They did an incredible job.
It is more than a one-man job to make a documentary, isn't it?
Yeah, I bet.
Okay. We are standing here in front of a great group of volunteers because we are taking a short intermission to remind you that this is public television, non-commercial television, and you see a phone number there on the bottom of your screen, and we'd like to hear from you right now. Pick up the phone, talk to one of our volunteers, say, you're here. We appreciate what you're doing, and maybe, if you can, take your credit card out and pledge a few dollars of support for the mission that we are trying to accomplish here at KBDI Public Television.
After all, KBDI is the only station that's had the courage to display the proof of explosive demolition on mainstream TV. We just haven't seen it.
Yeah, and speaking of what we have just seen, Richard, why don't you elaborate a little bit on that incredible slow motion footage that we saw of the collapsing tower? What did we see?
Well, and this is just a preview of what we're going to be seeing in terms of explosions occurring 20, 40, 60 stories down below this canopy of destruction. And we're told by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that these are puffs of air. But clearly they're pulverized building materials, as you'll see. In the research edition, you're going to see a whole lot more detail about these. It's extraordinary. You're also going to see more about thermite spheres, these nanoparticle chips, and the destruction of evidence. Recycled to China, all of this steel, 99% of it, prior to the reports coming out. We have the same experts in each investigation, Tom. There were 4 investigations. These are not independent investigations at all. Civil engineering investigation, NIST, FEMA, etc. And many of them have, as we talk about in the research edition, when people pledge, the research edition will show you that most of them had defense contracts, $10 million annually, many of them. And most of them are nanothermite experts. They did the research, the initial research in this area. Foreman Williams, for example, consultant with NIST, Defense Department contracting expert. Nanothermite is not made in a cave in Afghanistan.
Now, we should emphasize, you talked about the research edition. That is a 2-hour version of the 1-hour program. If you would like to get your hands on this, talk to one of our volunteers at the $60 level and above. A copy can be yours. For more information about all of our thank you gifts, let's go over to Sherry Burnson. Thanks, Sherry. Again, a tremendous amount of information that's being shoveled out here. Fairly technical information. Now, you're an architect, of course, and I guess it takes someone who knows how to build a building to know how a building should or should not come down.
Well, actually, this is not exactly true, Tom. Architects are not trained in the destruction of buildings, but everybody can see this evidence is intuitive. Everybody gets, by show of hands, which we do at all of our presentations, and I've given over 100 presentations across the country, in Europe, across Canada, and we're going to Japan, New Zealand, and Australia this before the end of the year, and they get it. We have 30 structural engineers, for instance, now signed on to our petition demanding a new and real investigation with subpoena power, and they get it. Virtually every one of them who has looked at our information.
Now, we were talking a bit earlier about this substance called thermite. And pretty clearly, thermite residue is present at the World Trade Center site. What is thermite and why is this important?
Well, most disturbing to those of us who expected NIST to perform a complete investigation, we would have expected that they would be willing to review the dust samples for explosives, since there were hundreds and hundreds of witnesses who heard sounds of explosions, saw flashes of light at the onset of the destruction of these 2 towers. First responders in oral recordings that we didn't even know about until August of 2005. Thermite is not normally used in controlled demolitions. Why would they have done this? Well, these appear to be deceptive controlled demolitions. Normally, higher energy explosives like C4 or RDX are used, which have loud bangs and bright flashes, which is very different than the Building 7 collapse, for instance, where we have we don't have those loud. Maybe that's the reason that they used thermite in this particular case.
Pretty fascinating story. Let's go back over and talk to Sherry and a special friend.
Thanks, Tom. I'm back with Richard Gage, AIA, right here in our studio at KBDI, Colorado Public Television, and nowhere else. Richard, how does 9/11 Blueprint for Truth really differ from the official story that we've heard, and especially in relation to the Twin Towers?
Well, contrary to what you're seeing with your own eyes in 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, the official story tells us somehow that we have fires that we can steal and causing a gravitational collapse all the way down to the base of this building at near free fall acceleration, by the way. And of course, there's structural damage from the airplanes as well. But what we're seeing is very different. What we're seeing is evidence of explosive controlled demolition. And what we're going to see coming up in the next segment, which is really exciting, is the explosions occurring 20, 40, 60 stories down below this canopy of destruction. We're going to see how could they have planted explosives in the building without the tens of thousands of occupants knowing. How the 20-ton perimeter wall units were ejected laterally 600 feet at 50 to 70 miles per hour. And how there's no floors found at the base of either of these twin towers. There's 110 floors, each an acre in size. Where are they? We're going to be looking for that. How do we get pulverized concrete to a fine powder? This is extremely disturbing to the 750 architects demanding a real investigation. And of greatest disturbance to them is the NIST report, which goes up only to the initiation of collapse. There is no analysis, as we'll see in the coming segment, of the structural behavior of this building after the fall begins. Why? We'll answer that question coming up. And there's a lot more detail in the 2008 research edition, which of course we're asking you to call in now so that you can get it and make your pledge.
Thanks so much, Richard. That's right. We want you to support this fine station right now, but let's check in with Tom Colbert. Richard, it's really a fascinating, provocative documentary, 9/11 Blueprint for Truth.
And disturbing.
And disturbing. The first time I watched it, I became very emotional. In fact, this whole journey with 9/11 Press for Truth and also 9/11 Blueprint for Truth has been very, very informative, very enlightening. And you know, it's because of the Colorado community that we wanted to air your documentary that really looks at the physical and the scientific evidence. And so much more is coming up. In fact, a couple of things you didn't mention last pass.
Indeed. We're going to be looking at the expert corroboration. Experts have come together to say, yeah, these are explosive demolitions, and yet we don't see that in the media. And we're, in fact, in addition to Danny Jawenko, who confirms, a 20-year controlled demolition expert, that Building 7 comes down, it's obviously a controlled demolition team of experts did this. Well, we're going to see a few of the 30 structural engineers coming up that talk about this as well and corroborate our work. Also, we're going to be analyzing the behavior of the South Tower, which begins to tilt at 22 degrees. With asymmetrical damage from the planes, asymmetrical damage from the loading because it's falling off of its center of gravity, and yet complete symmetrical damage at 2/3 of free fall speed traveling all the way down the body of the South Tower. It is uncanny. You have to see this.
And when you pledge at the $60 level or above, you're going to have your own DVD to screen. And as mentioned, it's a 2-hour research edition. A lot more information available in this DVD. And that's at the $60 level or any level above that you'd like to contribute and make that important financial contribution to independent public television. So let's toss it back to Tom.
Do we have a straight down symmetrical progression of collapse outside the footprint?
Thanks, Sherry. My name is Tom Colbert, a longtime volunteer here at Channel 12, and I am here to help welcome Richard Gage, AIA, from San Francisco, who made this film. And I have to say, it is an amazing accomplishment. You know, Richard, one of the things that has impressed me about getting to know all of these people, our phone volunteers and you and Fran, is that we're not really dealing with a political movement here. It's really a quest for the truth that cuts across the whole political spectrum. You know, there's some of these people are Reagan Republicans, some of them are hardcore Boulder liberals, but they're all sort of united in a quest for the truth.
This is true, and the truth is arrived at in modern times by using the scientific method, which is our modern way of winnowing error from truth. And so that's what we do at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. That's what we apply with 9/11 Blueprint for Truth. For instance, we're looking at an analysis of free fall from David Chandler, physicist, who's looking at how fast these buildings came down. And it defies the laws of physics. That is, without explosives, removing these core columns, allowing these buildings to fall. Continuous acceleration. The building's getting faster and faster and faster. What does NIST tell us about this? They say it's completely consistent with their collapse theory of fire. Well, a fire would have had to have taken out 400 structural steel connections per second, Tom.
This is amazing, and I guess your research edition of the DVD, which is twice as long as what we're watching, goes into this in quite a bit more detail as well.
Indeed, it's a whole lot more detail, an additional hour of applying the scientific method to all of these characteristic features of controlled demolition, which the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth find so much compatibility with and end up signing our petition.
Well, we'll get more into that in just a minute, but right now we've got to go hear some more from Sherry. It's a privilege to introduce and present Earl Stalen, who is a trial attorney here in Denver. Earl, thanks for coming down tonight. And I know you've had quite a bit of professional experience as an attorney working with errors and omission type suits in professional practice for engineers and architects. So you told me that you were kind of skeptical of all of this stuff at first, and then when you got into it, you started taking on a different opinion.
Yes, that's right. I bought into the official story until 2006, until I began to look into it.
And I know you've been looking quite a bit at sort of the forensics of the explosives. What have you concluded about that?
Well, one of the questions that people have is how could people get access to the building to place explosives if that's what happened? And there are several areas there that need to be looked into. First, if they had access to the elevator shafts, they could place explosives on all 47 core columns and all beams from top to bottom in the building, and there are about 50 elevator shafts in each tower. Second, for 9 months before 9/11, the largest elevator modernization program in history was going on in the towers. This meant shutting down one elevator at a time. That would allow an excuse and an opportunity to allow workers in the building disguised as workmen to place explosives.
So you're saying, as improbable as it seems, it is quite possible that somebody was able to mastermind this.
That's correct, and that needs to be investigated. Also, the security firm that would have in charge of the towers, which it's been found has some connections to people who might have been involved in this.
Yeah, well, we appreciate your being down here. We'll talk more about this in just a minute, but Sherry is over with Richard. Let's talk to them.
Richard's back here this time. Hey, 1-800-690-5234 or kbdi.org. We've got a couple of lines open right now, so give us a call. Richard, we've got just a few more minutes before we're going to wrap this amazing, appearance from you and some of the folks from the phone bank. Are there any more technical details that you wanted to discuss right now?
Oh yeah, let's make sure that people understand what they're going to see on the research edition of Blueprint for Truth that you haven't seen tonight. For instance, we have 10,000 pages in the NIST report completely obscuring the truth of what actually happened on that fateful day to these buildings. So, for instance, there's only 1.5 pages out of these 10,000 pages that even comes close to attempting to describe what happened to this building after the initiation of collapse. They speculate completely that the building came down essentially at free fall speed. This is a huge problem. There's no technical analysis whatsoever. Also, Sherry, I want people to understand that there were 20,000 pieces of bodies found 6,000 small enough to fit into a test tube. And yet over 1,100 people were never accounted for, not a trace of them. What happened? And where is the metal decking, for instance, and the file cabinets, tens of thousands of file cabinets? They only found one remnant of one file cabinet at the base of either of these buildings. You could pick it up with your pinky. This is a huge problem for the official story, including 700 bone fragments found on top of the Deutsche Bank building. They were half an inch long.
It's heartbreaking, Richard. And how did they get these demolition materials into the building?
Well, we have evidence that there was the largest elevator modernization going on, and this was going on with Ace Elevator, as I think Earl mentioned, a real problem for the official story, a real focus of investigation, a real investigation, which the family members want.
Well, let's go over we're going to go back on over to Tom and Earl right now. We'll be back with Richard.
Earl, let's go back to what we were talking about before, about the explosives.
Well, one of the questions people have asked is, why haven't we heard about this in the mainstream media?
Exactly.
Okay. This topic is covered quite well in Barry Zwicker's book, Towers of Deception. That's a gift with one of the memberships. Also, it's covered quite well in Richard Gage's longer DVD, Blueprint for Truth, which is the research edition, the 2-hour edition. But I want to say a few things about that. One is, most people are really not aware that most of our media, about 90%, is controlled by 5 major corporations. The people who run these corporations and the people who sit on the boards are the same people who run, many of them are the same people who sit on the boards of defense contractors, the banking industry.
Seems like they have a lot of incentive not to rock the boat.
That's correct. There's an old phrase, who pays the piper calls the tune. And that's one of the problems in the media, is that who owns it and what interest do they reflect? There are many very fine journalists who've reported articles about 9/11 as shown in Paul Thompson's timeline of 9/11. But because the control of these organizations is reflective of the military and other industries, they have the ability to control content over the long term.
Okay. Susie's telling us we got to go back over to Sherry. Thanks, Earl.
You know, you can log on to kbdi.org, go up in the right-hand corner, click the red button, Donate, and when you go down and you see the menu, you can click on 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, and you can read descriptions about all of the great thank you gifts that we've put together for you to continue your own research. So, Richard, what about the 9/11 Commission? What happened to them? What are they doing? What's up?
Well, what did they do? What didn't they do? They didn't even mention the third worst structural failure in modern history, the collapse of the 47-story Building 7. The destruction of this building was absolutely monumental. And they said, the leader of the 9/11 Commission himself says that they were set up to fail by the Bush administration. They were lied to by the Air Force. They were lied to by the CIA. We did not get a real investigation, and it took over a year to get this commission to even happen, and that only by the incredible efforts of the 4 widows, the Jersey girls, which pressured the Bush administration into having this and this commission.
And you know, too, Richard, we wanted to talk about NYC Can. You've got to tell it. You know, I talk to folks out there in our community, and this is huge news that's going on in New York City right now, and people in Colorado don't even know it.
It should be nationwide news. The people of New York have signed 72,000 signatures, twice as many as they need, in order to get a real investigation with subpoena power and taken under oath. Powers which the 9/11 Commission report did not even have at their disposal.
And where can people get more information about that?
Go to nyccan.org, and see how you can help them as well. Now, while you're at it, we have a website also. It's AE911Truth.org. Sign our petition. You don't have to be an architect or engineer. We have several categories, and we have 4,000 others in addition to the 750 architects and engineers.
Well, they're telling us we got to take it back on over to Tom. Tom.
Thanks, Sherry and Richard. It really is a privilege having Richard here for this world premiere broadcast. Kind of on a personal note, I visited New York City, went to Lower Manhattan about 3 years ago in the springtime, and made a point of visiting the World Trade Center site. I'd never been there when the towers were in existence, so I don't know what it was like before other than what I've seen in pictures. But there is a presence and aura about that site, which was just a hole in the ground with a bunch of construction equipment in it when I saw it, that is not to be denied. It is extremely compelling, and I think that for anybody who sees it, for anybody who saw on television the collapse of the World Trade Center, that if there is any question, any doubt as to what the truth of those events were, if there was a cover-up, if anything other than the official government line needs to be exposed, it is our duty to ask these questions and ask competent, impartial people to come up with answers so that history can be written the way it should be. That's what we're trying to do here tonight. It's part of a mission, not to say one thing or another, but just to say, let's get at the truth. And let's now go over and talk to Sherry and Richard some more.
Okay, this is the wrap-up right now, the world broadcast premiere of 9/11 Blueprint for Truth on your favorite public TV station. Richard Gage, AIA, has been our special guest, also members from the Colorado 9/11 Visibility Group. Richard, final words?
Yes, Sherry. Silence is betrayal. This is extremely important that we follow up on this valuable information. We have to get a new investigation. Everybody has to sit down, get on their computers, and send the AE911Truth.org link to every architect and engineer you know and everybody else that you can find. This is a grassroots movement growing by millions every year. We have to do our part.
Well, thanks so much, Richard, for joining us. Thanks for sharing this information. And thank you for supporting independent public television, KBDI. We'll see you later.
So very much. Thank you so very much.